Hello and welcome to the Art of the Turnaround, and welcome to Seattle. It's a city I hold in huge affection because it was the first place I came to when I first visited the USA about 25 years ago. My name is Alex Dunlop. I'm a reporter for the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC TV News, and one of the real joys of my job is meeting people, talking to people from all walks of life and finding out what makes them who they are. And I've had the privilege of doing that for the last 30 years or so. Now, in this series of podcasts, I'll be talking to Mike Dunlop, who's very kindly invited me back to his home city of Seattle. You've lived here for how long, Mike?
50 years.
50 years.
Almost to the day.
My goodness. It is almost to the day.
Almost to the day, yes.
Well, we're here to talk in part about his new book, The Art of the Turnaround, how to revive companies which otherwise would have gone to the wall. Now, first up, Mike, keeping with the theme of Seattle, I noticed recently you were splashed across the front page of the Seattle Times. For those who haven't seen that edition, why?
This was a very interesting article by the aerospace writer of the Seattle Times called Dominic Gates, and he was kind enough to come and visit our new facility for the first fully autonomous manufacturing facility, manufacturing aerospace components.
And this is a company called Autonomous Machining.
Autonomous Machining, which I founded a little over a year ago.
Right. You're also the founder of another company called Net Inspector Software Company. I'm about 60 and I'm creaking a bit. You are 75. Don't you just want to slow down a bit?
Well, firstly, I'm not creaking, so that's good. But secondly, no, I believe that while I have the energy and while I can contribute, this is something that I enjoy doing.
Okay, you've written this book, The Art of the Turnaround. You've turned around, 34 companies?
Yes.
So you're clearly qualified to do it. But why write this book? And why write it now?
Well, it was a revelation when I was asked recently, having not done a turnaround for probably 25 years, I was asked by a group of shareholders to work with their company in Eastern Washington. And during that process, I found that exactly the same challenges that I had encountered 25, 30 years ago applied today. And so I realized there were founding principles that if I could document them would help other people who either owned a company that was in trouble or someone who'd been brought into a company to help them rectify their financial condition.
So is this book for people who want to turn around companies?
It can be, but it can also people who have an existing company that is challenged and they want to start a renaissance. They want to get back to where the company originally was. It may be declining. How do they renovate it? How do they restart the energy?
Do that many companies need turning around, that it merits a book?
Yes. In fact, there are many companies, and particularly now with the fastest rate of increase in interest rates, this is precipitating a lot of challenges for companies that borrowed money at effectively 0%, and they're now paying 6 or 7%.
Right.
And that's a radical difference.
The art of the turnaround. You could have called it, I don't know, how to turn around a company, the mechanics of the turnaround. Why the art of the turnaround?
That's a very good question. And I thought about that for a long time. And one of the things I was trying to do was to recognize that it wasn't purely mechanical. This was genuinely understanding and reading the room. There was an enormous amount of psychology involved in helping people re-examine the company and plotting a path to a future that was brighter than the current situation.
You gave me the book. It's a very easy read. It's in a way quite a simple read. Just talk me through the mechanics of it, because you say there are 10 steps to turn a company around. And I'm thinking, well, that's a bit of an arbitrary figure. It's like, Moses' 10 commandments. Why 10?
10 Commandments, I never quite thought of it in that light, but these are kind of 10 commandments for business people. No, I just felt these were the key critical elements in a sequence, and each element ties in with the next. So you start with the first one and you work your way through, and by the time you get to the end, you've had a significant change in the company, change in perspective, change in vision, change in optimism, and all these steps are consecutively done.
So you've got to follow those steps in that order.
Not necessarily. You can do some in parallel, but it is probably best to follow them in sequence because you gain the benefit of one with the next step.
Right. So it's not so much 10 steps. It's a roadmap.
Yes.
How simple is it to turn around a company?
It depends on the company. Some are kind of DOA, which is
Dead on arrival.
Dead on arrival. Others have a glimmer of hope. And I was very careful when I was doing turnarounds, when I did it as a full-time job, to pick ones that still were survivable. There was no point me coming into a company that was in an industry that had no future or declining industry. If the financials were so bad, there was no way out.
All right. So you have to pick and choose.
You have to pick them. You have to pick ones that have a heartbeat. There's still some brain activity. And also where you can see a potential in the overall business and also some of the people. So it was careful selection.
Okay, 34 companies. What sort of companies?
Every type. I mean, I was amazed at the different types of companies. I worked with manufacturing companies, complex aerospace manufacturing companies. I worked with distribution companies. I even ended up working with a law firm that had got themselves into financial trouble.
And is there a common thread as to why they fail? Or is this just this huge spectrum? They failed on this front, that front, or is one common leitmotif going through them?
I think there is, and I think that they don't want to address the situation. So they're in a state of denial. Every one of them almost got angry when I confronted them with the actual numbers. They didn't want to hear it. There had to be some other reason. And they also relied on the extraordinarily poor business strategy, which is hope. Hope is not a business strategy, although many companies incorporate it because they don't want to face the reality of what is actually happening.
Who brings you into turnaround the companies? Does the company come in? I guess it's the bank.
Yes, I was lucky enough when I did my first one that the bank introduced me after I'd successfully turned that around. They looked at their portfolio of troubled loans and they realized I was a valuable asset because I could recover money that they had written off.
And when you come in to turn around these companies, you say, hi, I'm Mike Dunlop, I'm going to turn around your company. What is the reaction? Because I'd have thought they'd be very defensive, or they might say, thank goodness you're here, come on in. How do they welcome you or not?
It's a combination of all of the above. Some are relieved, some are outrightly aggressive. We're not really that bad. We don't need any help.
That's a denial you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
We just have a cash flow problem, as if that was something that was just a matter of fact. The fact they have a cash flow problem is indicative of serious financial, but they use that, well, it's just a cash flow problem. So all sorts, I look across the whole spectrum, and I had every type. And one of the things I used to do was to turn up a day early than expected. And that allowed me to see it the way it was rather than the way that they wanted to present it.
That must really endear you to them, mustn't it?
Oh, yeah. I was, what are you doing here? Well, aren't you supposed to come tomorrow? We haven't put our toys away yet. And this is really
the toys they didn't want you to see.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Do they try and slam the door in your face? I mean, they could just say, look, go away, we're fine.
No. And initially I thought it was because of my unbelievable charisma and charm that they accepted me and accepted my recommendations.
Yeah, I think we'll chuck the word alleged in front of that.
But yes, we put alleged, but at least I thought that. And so I recognized very early on that they were terrified of the bank. And so I was actually leveraging that terror in order to get them to do the things that they should have done anyway.
So when they're looking you in the eye, they're actually looking at the big bear behind you.
Yes, and I remember we chatted about that story about where this French film L'Ours, which is the French for bear, and in this narrative, a mountain lion, a very aggressive mountain lion, is coming up a mountain path, and this little tiny bear goes tss, tss, and the mountain lion turns around and runs down the hill.
You're the little bear.
And as they pan back, here is this giant mother bear. They weren't running away from the little bear.
Right.
So in my case, my mother bear was the bank, and they knew I was connected to the bank because I'd been brought in by the bank. So I had significant leverage to, as I put it, encourage them to do the right thing.
Okay, so you pick your company, you're going to turn it around. How long does it take to turn around a failing company? I guess it depends on what the size of the company, the complexity of the mess they're in. Give me an idea of the time frame.
Well, the smaller companies, normally I could have the ship righted within a month.
A month?
A month, yes.
What, you've gone through the 10 steps
Yes,
in a month?
in a month, yes. And the larger companies, probably the longest it took was 3 or 4 months.
Right, so that's turning the oil tanker.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and ones that are some of the manufacturing companies have a lot of moving parts. You have complex customer relationships. You have complex supplier relationships. It's just very, and skill levels within the company that you can't easily replicate.
Of those 34 companies, have any of them subsequently failed?
I haven't kept track of every single one, but
within a year or two of you?
No. In fact, the first major one I did was recently, and this must have been 48 years ago. It recently sold for close to $600 million. The family and the children and the grandchildren then took over the business, and they recently sold it for a little over, I think, $600 million.
That's amazing. I just want to get an idea of the time frame of when you started turning over companies. You started your first company turnaround when you were 26 years old.
Yes.
You went in and turned a company around.
Yes.
We'll go into the background in a later podcast of how you set out where you are. And your last turnaround, there was a massive gap between the last two.
Yes, the last one was last year.
Mm-hmm. And the same template?
Absolutely same template. I was genuinely shocked by how nothing had changed, how the process works so effectively. And I just dusted off the template, and it was as if I had gone back 40 years.
See, I'd just be surprised that a company you turned around, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago would have the same template of issues as the last company a couple of years ago, because so many things have moved on. Technology, business practice.
I think they're human issues. I think that's where the art of the turnaround comes in, that these are human issues. These are not mechanical issues. The technology aspect, yes, it had advanced, but in many cases they hadn't adopted the technology. And so that was part of the challenge, that they hadn't really reinvested in the company and kept up to speed. But I think it was the psychology of how they were responding to the crisis was identical. And it goes back to a reference in the book to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the famous psychiatrist who identified the steps that people go through when they die. The first denial, then the anger, and then the prayer, will someone please save me, and then the acceptance. And so I sort of watched that pattern in almost every company I went in, particularly the denial and then the anger when you reveal exactly what the situation is, how badly they are off, how the challenges they have, and what they have to do to correct it.
So the 5 stages of a person dying is reflected pretty accurately in the 5 stages of a company.
Yes, very, very similar.
And what stage do you go in at?
The denial and anger, the acceptance. I've just had one recently where I was asked to go into a company And this was a very tragic situation where the company had a tremendous backlog of business, $60 million of backlog of business. And they hadn't invested in any equipment on the shop floor. And I took the owner out to the shop floor and I looked around, and the average age of the equipment was 35 years. And I said, this environment is really terrible. And I said, you can't, the reason you're having a problem is you can't find employees for second and third shift. I said, you have a grandson of 25 years old. Would you want him to work here? And he said, oh, no, hell no. No, I wouldn't want him
On the shop floor.
on the shop floor. And I said, well, why do you expect other people to? Why haven't you created an environment where people want to come to work? And I basically passed on, I gave him some options of some of the things that he could do, like investing significant amount of money in new technology.
Where's he going to find that money?
I explained to him that actually machine tool companies will finance 100%. You've got to take the risk for the future.
But a large part of a company failing is because they just don't have the cash. If they don't have the cash, how can you go and get them to invest?
But you can finance. You get the wonderful thing, number one, about America, and number two, about machine tools. They have such intrinsic value if they're good quality that the machine tool companies will finance them 100%.
But that's not rocket science. Why can't they do that before you ever appear on the scene?
Because they don't want to take the risk, and they don't want to make the investment, and they look at effectively putting themselves in debt for $2-3 million, when really they just want to get by, and they don't have a vision for the future. They don't understand what they have created, and now the repercussions are that they can't find people who are willing to work. And that actually goes back to autonomous machining. We've created an environment there that's well-paying, has the latest technology with everything in the company, and a very pleasant working environment.
Yeah, but only 2 people work there apart from you.
We only need 2 people, and that's the difference. A lot of companies have overhead where they have one person doing this job and one person doing that job. And we found a way with technology, there's software on a particular function in the machine shop that would take normally a month to program the main machine. We've got that down to less than an hour. And so by using technology to compact time, you don't need as many people.
Right, I can see a load of people out there screaming, great, you just want to get rid of our jobs.
It's a very good question. The problem is that no one wants these jobs in the first place. So this is exactly what has happened with the company that I visited.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't get it. Why do people not want the jobs they've got?
Because the environment is unpleasant. There's lots and lots of alternatives.
Are there in an economic downturn?
Yeah, absolutely. Our current state of unemployment, which is about 3%, it's very, very hard to find people to work on second shift and on graveyard shift. And this is what happened to this company. They had absolutely no one who was willing to work second shift and graveyard shift. They had a $60 million backlog, and they still couldn't find anybody. So yes, it's a real problem. And in fact, the reason the article was in the paper was Dominic Gates had written an article about how hard it was to find skilled people for the aerospace industry. And I sent him a brief email saying, it reminds me of what Mark Twain said, everybody talks about the weather, but no one does anything about it. And everybody's been talking about this lack of ability to find skilled workers for the last 10, 15 years. And to add to that, we have a demographic change where the people in their 50s and 60s now are retiring. They're not being replaced. So we have this giant gap, and the only way it can be replaced is by technology. And when you incorporate technology, you have the ability to pay at a level that people have never even dreamed about before.
Yeah. We will drill down into that in later podcasts. I'm curious, just on the surface level, what's the buzz about turning around a company?
The buzz is, it's like taking an old car that is still just working and then redoing it from top to bottom. And at the end,
As long as you get to choose the car. If it's an E-Type Jag, great. If it's a Trabant, maybe not.
well, even a Trabant that's completely renovated looks better than the one before. And it never looked good in the first place. I would totally agree. But yes, but the renaissance, the rebirth, seeing people start enjoying their work, giving them a vision of the future, watching them change mentally, yes, that's an extraordinarily powerful and rewarding type of work. And I absolutely loved it. I think I would have kept on doing it. In fact, I'm tempted to go back to doing it because I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, I was about to say, if someone came up to you tomorrow and said, look, I've got this company that's just going down the pan, would you be tempted? Would you have the
Absolutely,
time?
absolutely. I'm trying to do 4 a year at the moment.
Is there money in it?
Yes, but I have a fixed fee, and that's $25,000, and only when the company is profitable, when it's turned around. So I take no money going in, number one, because I love it, and number two, we find a nice charity to give the money to, and it's a way of raising $100,000 a year. It's doing something that I love.
When you go into a company, you have to wear so many different hats. You know, you have to be an ER doctor treating a trauma victim. I guess you have to be a priest in a confessional when people are going to say, look, the game's up, this is what it's all about. At the same time, you're a counselor soothing a patient because many people are there going to be so traumatized by the thing. And yet, wearing all those three hats, you're also going to be, I don't know, Caesar in the Colosseum going, yeah, no, yes. How do you reconcile all those different competing roles?
It is interesting. It evolves. And every turnaround I did, I learned a new skill. I didn't start with all those skills, but as I did more and more turnarounds, I learned how to do various things. I learned more about people. Initially, I was somewhat arrogant, and there was a dreadful turnaround person called Al Dunlap, L-A-P, and he was no relation, and he was called Chainsaw Al, and he took over companies. One of the big companies he took over was Sunbeam, and he just slashed it from top to bottom, and got it turned around. But he destroyed the heart of the company. He destroyed the soul of the company. He destroyed anybody's ambition for the future. And the company filed for bankruptcy 2 or 3 years after he had gone into the company. So you really focus on the future, and you act as a leader and as a guide to the future to give people a destination they want to go to. And the way I've described it is you're at the bottom of the mountain, and you're the leader, and there's this massive mountain in front of you. But you have the ability to describe what the view is from the top of the mountain in such clarity and so in such detail that people want to climb the mountain. And that was the most interesting part, watching people turn from cynicism, in some case anger, to recreate a vision for the future that they got excited about.
Do you sometimes go halfway up the mountain and say, you know what, this is just not going to work, and just walk away from a company that's just not going to cut it?
I never walked away, but I had those serious doubts. Yes, but you can't be the captain of a ship inspecting the lifeboats because otherwise the passengers get rather alarmed. So you have to have this inner confidence. If you have your doubts, have them on your own.
Oh, right. So that's another hat you have to wear, being an actor.
Yes, totally. And if you have any doubt, you don't show it. And if you need to inspect the lifeboats, do it at night when all the passengers are asleep, because the last thing they want to see is the captain checking whether the lifeboats work.
What do you want people to take away from this book? We'll talk about the book in detail, but just at the outset, what do you want people to take away from it?
I think the psychology and the possibilities in work that you can create long-term enjoyment. So when you get to the age of 65, when you're normally gracelessly put on the shelf, you can keep going. and because you're doing something that you're passionate about, something you love, something you want to do. And the Japanese have a wonderful saying called ikigai. It's a word called ikigai, and it means a purpose in life. So the second you wake up in the morning, you have a purpose. There is a rationale for you waking up. There's a rationale for that day. And I see with many of my friends who have retired, the only thing they have to talk about is their appointment on the golf course and their appointment with the doctor. And they have so many illnesses, and the doctors are very willing to reveal all the things that are wrong. And I've reminded them that if you have a very old car that's still working, the last thing you do is take it into a garage and have them give you a list of everything that's not working properly. So that's kind of what doctors do. If you go to a doctor, you end up with a long list of things that are not working properly. And so I think it's really to create excitement for the future. And interesting enough, I've got a couple of responses to the article that was in the Seattle Times. And one of them was from a parent who said, I want my children to talk to you because you give the vision that the future is genuinely exciting and enjoyable. And they've been told there is no future, the world is coming to an end, climate change, COVID. I mean, they get bombarded by all these negatives. And you have a very optimistic viewpoint of the future and a very optimistic viewpoint about how all the excitement that's possible for younger people right now.
And I don't want to sound impertinent, but it may sound impertinent. Is this as much an indulgent memoir as much of an instruction manual?
No, I don't think it's indulgent. You always, when you get to
Just being deliberately prepared.
No, I understand that. So when you get to a certain age, some people want to feel they've left a legacy. They've left something behind. They're going to be gone and in many cases forgotten. And yes, there may be some hubris in saying, I want to leave something behind. I want to leave a legacy. And maybe in that legacy, there are some jewels that people can use, enjoy. Maybe there's a possibility that it can change their lives. And so it's really wrapping up a life and hoping to create a legacy.
Okay, so this is as much a memoir as a manual.
I think so, yes, because I've had such an extraordinary life. I've done some unbelievably interesting things. I've met some wonderful people. I've met some quite horrible people. But I've had a color in my life because I had the luck of being fired from my first job in America. And that gave me freedom. I was told I was unemployable. My parting interview with the president of the company, and I was 25, just 26, he said, you're unemployable. He said, you need to do something on your own. And it was that advice that gave me the most extraordinary life that I could have imagined.
Well, Mike, in future podcasts, we'll talk about the book and those 10 steps. And I'm really keen to talk to you about your personal journey because I think the past always informs the present. But for now, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.